Grade 7 students. Ito ang inyong Quarter 3 Week 8. Most essential learning competencies are: explains the importance of grieving, demonstrates coping skills in managing loss and grief. Recognize triggers and warning signs of common mental disorders, discusses the types, signs, symptoms, and prevention, treatment and professional care in managing common mental health disorders, rearing and care. Discusses the types, signs, symptoms, and prevention, treatment and professional care in managing common mental health disorders. Coping skills in managing loss and grief. Death refers to the end of the physical being of a person that is caused by an illness, aging, or an accident. Loss occurs when someone dies or a life situation changes or ends, and grief refers to the emotional suffering caused by a loss, disaster, or misfortune. Meeks et al. 2007. Furthermore, loss and grief may include a change in the family, changes in living conditions, the death of a friend, suicide, the death of a well-known person, tragedies in the news, and the loss of special belongings. Meeks et al. 2007. Loss, grief, and death may greatly affect the mental and emotional health of a person.
Listen. There's no right or wrong way to deal with the loss of a loved one. You can expect grieving to be rough, and it's different for every single person. Another important thing, it's not just a matter of coping with loss. It's about coping with change. And that, Wellcasters, takes a lot of time. Today on Wellcast, we're dealing with a pretty difficult subject. How do you deal with the death of a loved one? How do you live your life in the face of a life-changing event? We don't have all the answers, and honestly, you're going to have to work through your pain in your own way, at your own pace. But if you're looking for it, we do have some advice. First things first, you need to remember that grief is a process and not a task. You might have heard of a popular theory that breaks up bereavement into stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. While you might identify with some or all of these steps, you gotta remember that grief is less like a staircase and more like a roller coaster. There are peaks and dips, and they don't always happen in predictable ways. You might feel better for a while and then worse, and that's okay. It's natural to have an uneven journey with your grief. Don't be afraid of the pain. You shouldn't try to stuff your sorrow away into a place where you don't have to deal with it. It's just going to stay there. In order for you to work through your grief, you're first going to have to acknowledge that it exists. There are a lot of ways to do this. You might have to be alone for a bit. Maybe you need to write down your feelings in a journal or talk to someone. Do things that make you happy. When you're grieving, it's sometimes difficult to hold on to who you are. After all, so much of your energy is focused on the mourning of your loved one, which is fair, but it's easy to get sucked into a mind space where you can't even remember your former self. We want to tell you it's okay to take time to do the things that make you feel like yourself and give you joy. Recognize the relationship between the mind and the body. When you're experiencing grief, it's really easy to forget the things that you usually do as a matter of routine. Taking a shower, getting enough sleep, eating. Neglecting your physical health is only going to take a greater toll on your mental health, which is taking a pretty significant hit right now. So, do yourself a favor, and do us a favor, and make an effort to take care of you. It's what your loved one would want. Reach out. Wellcasters, if you take nothing else away from this episode, please remember this. You do not have to be alone in your grief. If your feelings are too overwhelming for you to sort out, that's okay. But go to someone else for help. It can be someone you know, a family member or a friend, or it can be a therapist or a professional who knows how to help people deal with this exact situation that you find yourself in right now. Just the act of talking out loud about your feelings can be incredibly cathartic. Finding someone who can help you sort them and work through them is even better.
Mental health disorders. Mental illnesses.
Mental illness. The quick facts. What is mental illness? Mental illness includes a wide range of disorders of thinking, emotion, and/or behavior. There are many different types of mental illness, and it can be short-lived or long-term. Sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference between mental illness and normal worry or sadness, but mental illness is more severe, lasts longer, and significantly affects a person's ability to cope with life. Almost half of adults experience symptoms of mental illness at some point. Depression is very common. The main treatments are medicines and counseling. Family, friends, and support groups can also help people cope with mental illness. What are the types of mental illness? Mental illness is really many different disorders. These disorders fall into broad categories including anxiety, mood disorders such as being too sad or too excited, schizophrenia, personality disorders, and obsessive-compulsive disorders. Other mental health disorders include eating disorders, stress disorders such as PTSD, and suicidal behavior. What causes mental illness? Mental illness is probably caused by many things in combination, including inherited factors, life stresses, the environment and culture you live in, and health problems that affect your brain. Many stresses, such as losing a job, getting divorced, or taking too many drugs, increase the risk of mental illness. Certain health problems that affect a baby's brain, such as complications during birth or a brain infection by a virus, increase the risk of mental illness later on in life. Mental illness doesn't occur because people are lazy or irresponsible. It is not something people do on purpose. Symptoms are different depending on what kind of problem you have. They may include major changes in personality or behavior, especially if they happen for no clear reason, confusion and cloudy thinking, odd, disorganized thoughts, such as jumping from topic to topic or answering simple questions with long, confusing answers, inappropriate behavior, such as undressing in public, seeing or hearing things that aren't there, believing things that aren't true despite strong evidence to the contrary, and extreme moods. How can doctors tell if someone has a mental illness? Doctors diagnose mental illness by talking to the person. Sometimes they'll also talk to caregivers or family members. Sometimes it's obvious that symptoms are caused by a mental illness. For example, people insisting that they're the president or that their thoughts are being controlled by a radio implanted in their brain. Other times, it's hard to distinguish mental illness from normal reactions. For example, it can be hard to tell normal grief from depression after the death of a spouse or child because both involve sadness and a depressed mood. Likewise, the line between being neat or orderly and having obsessive-compulsive disorder can be blurry. Any dividing line is usually based on how severe the symptoms are, how long the symptoms last, and how much symptoms affect the ability to function. Doctors have made a great deal of progress in successfully treating mental illness. The main treatments include medicine and talk therapy. For most mental health disorders, a combination is more effective than either one by itself. Other treatments include electroconvulsive therapy and transcranial magnet stimulation. In the past, people with mental illness were often placed in institutions or hospitals. Today, people are more likely to live productively in the community, but many people with mental illness still don't get the care and support they need.
Trigger.
What is the psychological trigger? Robert Cialdini and some of his team conducted a whole range of behavioural experiments, but one of them that was most interesting, that really describes what a psychological trigger is, was done at the University of Arizona, where they basically got a scrub turkey in its natural habitat, and they started to play with the scrub turkey and see how it responded in very predictable ways. So the first thing that they did is they actually got access to a polecat. So they basically put the polecat in the environment with the scrub turkey that was nesting. So it had chicks in its nest. The polecat tried to attack the turkey's chicks, and the scrub turkey actually defended its nest and killed the polecat. Who would agree that's predictable? One of the babies actually died. So they actually got the baby that had died, the little chick that had died, they took it to a taxidermist, got it completely stuffed, came back and put it back into the pen. And guess what the mother did when they put it back in the pen? Nothing. Didn't do anything, completely ignored it. And they thought, okay, fairly predictable. It's a dead toy, basically. So then they thought, well, let's see what happens if we actually put a sound device inside the stuffed chick that emanates the same frequency of chirp as all the other chicks, and then put that stuffed animal back into the environment. And guess what the scrub turkey did? She waddled over, started rolling over, and rolled the stuffed toy into her nest and started nesting it and trying to feed it. Now, what does that tell you? What social science discovered that when certain psychological triggers are activated, it actually will, in some cases, force a very predictable behavior where all other visual and sensory information is completely ignored. Now, they went one step further. They stuffed the polecat that had been killed in the first experiment, and then they stuffed the sound device inside the polecat that had been killed in the first experiment. So now they have a stuffed cat that's making a cheeping noise, and they put it in the habitat of the scrub turkey. And guess what the scrub turkey did? Rolled it over into her nest, squashing other babies, and then sat on it and tried to nest it and feed it. This basically means that there are certain psychological triggers that once activated are so powerful, not only does it force them to ignore other sensory information, it actually forces them to behave in ways that you would consider, in many cases, totally irrational. Who has seen people in certain situations, when their buttons are pushed, act completely irrational? Imagine the scrub turkey for a moment. What was the key trigger that determined the very predictable behavior in the scrub turkey? Cheep, cheep, cheep. The moment it heard the cheep, it literally activated something in its brain to behave in a very predictable way and ignore everything else.
Anxiety disorder.
I can't believe what my boss just said to me. She must think I'm doing a terrible job. I have to quit.
All my friends are so happy when they go out. I don't get it. I can't even imagine what they're thinking of me.
If I don't get this internship, I'll never get a job. I don't know what else I can do. I'm stuck.
I hate airports. Driving there, construction, traffic, parking, and then security, everything about it just overwhelms me. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental health problems. While everyone experiences stress and anxiety at some point in life, some people become so overwhelmed that they can't manage their day-to-day or minute-to-minute lives. I know. One of these voices is mine. There are several types of anxiety, and they can affect people in different ways. You might have heard of specific phobia, social phobia, panic disorder, or generalized anxiety disorder, or others. Some of these seem like they might be manageable, like a fear of heights. It's not always convenient to avoid tall buildings, but you could do it. Others, like panic disorder or social phobia, might be harder to manage because they cause problems at unpredictable times, like when you're in public. Each anxiety disorder is different, but basically they all have one thing in common. They cause excessive worry that affects thoughts, feelings, and physical symptoms, and that causes problems in a person's life for at least 6 months. For me, I struggled with generalized anxiety disorder. I was worried about everything. Things I couldn't control, like getting stuck in traffic and being late for an appointment, made me really angry. I worried about what other people thought of me. Looking at my schedule each morning was the worst part of my day. It felt impossible to do everything I put on my list. This really caused problems in my relationships. I yelled at people. I know I seemed demanding and rigid. At night, I was exhausted and sad, and I'd cry because I was so upset. Most people with anxiety disorders also experience physical symptoms, like shortness of breath, racing heart, and sweating. Some people even get headaches or high blood pressure. Stress and anxiety are very real physical problems. Eventually, people avoid doing anything stressful so they don't have these symptoms. The good news is that anxiety disorders are treatable. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, exposure therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, are evidence-based treatments that can treat any type of anxiety disorder. Relaxation techniques, controlled breathing, and meditation have also been shown to be effective in reducing the physical symptoms of anxiety. There are lots of medications that are also helpful, including medications for depression and anxiety known as SSRIs and SNRIs. Social support, stress management, and self-care techniques are also common parts of any treatment plan for an anxiety disorder. I was worried about so many things for so long, but I got help. I worked with a great counselor and took an SSRI. I even started yoga. Now, when I begin to feel stress, I can look at the situation more carefully, slow down my breathing, and take care of any tasks that are reasonable. Treatment can really help people overcome their symptoms of anxiety. I know, I did.
Behavioral and emotional disorders.
Behavioral and emotional disorders in children. Childhood mental and developmental disorders encompass neurodevelopmental, emotional, and behavioral disorders that have broad and serious adverse impacts on psychological and social well-being. Children with these disorders require significant additional support from families and educational systems. The disorders frequently persist into adulthood. These children are more likely to experience a compromised developmental trajectory, with increased need for medical and disability services, as well as increased risk of contact with law enforcement agencies. The discussion to the following 5 conditions: childhood anxiety disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, conduct disorder, autism, and intellectual disability, intellectual developmental disorder. Anxiety disorders are characterized by excessive or inappropriate fear, with associated behavioral disturbances that impair functioning, APA 2013. Children with anxiety disorders have clinical symptoms, such as excessive anxiety, severe physiological anxiety symptoms, behavioral disturbances, such as avoidance of feared objects, and associated distress or impairment. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by inattention and disorganization, with or without hyperactivity impulsivity, causing impairment of functioning, APA 2013. ADHD persists into adulthood in approximately 20% of individuals, Polizik and Road 2007. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by severe impairment in reciprocal social interactions and communication skills, as well as the presence of restricted and stereotypical behaviors. Intellectual disability is a generalized disorder that is characterized by significantly impaired cognitive functioning and deficits in 2 or more adaptive behaviors. These issues are exacerbated when investigating mental disorders in children, particularly in LMICs where other health concerns, such as infectious diseases, are priorities. Although regional differences may exist, the lack of data makes them difficult to ascertain. The 12-month global prevalence of childhood mental disorders in 2010. ADHD, conduct disorder, and autism were more prevalent in males. Females were more likely to suffer from anxiety disorders.
Bipolar affective disorders.
Bipolar disorder is a mental health condition that affects a person's day-to-day interactions, behaviors, mood, thoughts, energy, and ability to focus. There are 3 different types of bipolar disorder: bipolar 1 disorder, bipolar 2 disorder, and cyclothymic disorder, or cyclothymia. All 3 types cause symptoms of either mania or depression, or both. Some examples of manic symptoms are unusually high energy, talkativeness, distractibility, and less need for sleep. Some examples of depressive symptoms are feelings of extreme sadness, lack of energy, lack of emotions or motivation, hopelessness, and guilt. The difference between each type of bipolar disorder comes down to when they begin and how severe the manic and depressive symptoms are. Bipolar 1 disorder typically begins around age 18, although onset can occur at any point in someone's life. A person with bipolar 1 disorder will experience manic episodes that are present for at least 7 days and can be so severe that the person may require hospitalization. The person may also experience major depressive episodes or symptoms, although some people with bipolar 1 may only experience mania without any depression. A person with bipolar 2 disorder will experience episodes of both major depression and hypomania. The symptoms of hypomania are the same as mania, but they are less severe and only last up to 4 days rather than a week. Cyclothymia can begin as early as 6 years of age and may eventually develop into bipolar 1 or 2. A person with cyclothymic disorder will experience hypomanic and depressive symptoms, but never to the extent that they qualify as mania or major depression. There is no single cause of bipolar disorder, but research shows that it may be related to several factors, such as genetics, a person's environment, and brain structure. It is common for people with bipolar disorder to have other mental health diagnoses, such as psychosis, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, or substance or alcohol use disorder. Bipolar disorder is a lifelong mental health condition, but with the help of treatment provided by a licensed mental health professional, it is possible to reduce and manage the symptoms. Bipolar disorder is usually treated with a combination of medication and psychotherapy.
Depression.
Depression is a disorder that afflicts over 10% of the world's population, but we as a society know little about it. Stereotypes tell us that depressed people are weak, unless they happen to be a tortured artist. It can be difficult to understand depression because it's invisible. It's a disorder defined by thoughts, behaviors, and feelings, rather than obvious symptoms like vomiting, rashes, or fever. Those who have experienced depression are all too familiar with comments from misguided friends such as "snap out of it" or "just get up and do something." Even those with depression might have a hard time understanding what they are experiencing, and they often blame themselves for not being able to snap out of it. To understand what depression really is, we need to talk about symptoms. First of all, depression has symptoms related to how someone feels. These symptoms include nearly constant feelings of sadness, anger, guilt, or hopelessness. Next, there are symptoms related to behavior. They include social withdrawal, a lack of energy, low motivation, poor concentration, sleep problems, or significant changes in appetite. Finally, symptoms related to thoughts include poor self-esteem, thoughts of suicide, and loss of interest in regular activities. Symptoms of depression must last at least 1 week, and they are often cyclical. This means that the symptoms can come and go over a period of months or years. A person who experiences depression once is likely to have future episodes. It can be difficult to think of these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors as symptoms. To many of us, because they are in our head, they can seem like decisions. It can seem like someone who is depressed has chosen to be lazy and sleep all day, or they have decided to stop spending time with friends because they have a bad attitude. But remember, what's in our head isn't imaginary. Our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by a complex series of chemicals in our brains.
Obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, is a specific type of anxiety disorder characterized by these obsessions or compulsions. Obsessions are recurrent and intrusive thoughts that are typically unwanted and tough to get out of your brain. These unwanted thoughts, like "my house is unsafe," cause anxiety, and usually they lead to compulsions, which are actions that might be performed to try and reduce the anxiety associated with obsessions. As you might imagine, these thoughts and rituals can have a serious impact on someone's daily life. OCD affects around 3% of the population, and affects both men and women equally, and usually starts in childhood or in the teen years. Celebrities like David Beckham and Howie Mandel are known to be affected by OCD, and a more severe example is that of Howard Hughes, business tycoon and entrepreneur, among other things, who was affected by a relatively incapacitating OCD later in his life. Although obsessive-compulsive includes both obsessions and compulsions, one doesn't need both obsessions and compulsions for a diagnosis. Some individuals might have just obsessions or just compulsions.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
These are the voices of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Almost everyone lives through something traumatic at some point in life. Most people have a lot of distress right after a trauma happens, but begin to feel better over time. For other people, the distress sticks around, and they begin to have symptoms that really affect their lives. For these people, it is almost as if the trauma is still happening, all the time, everywhere, long after it has passed. I know. One of these voices is mine. What do we mean by trauma? When we're talking about PTSD, a trauma is a horrible experience where you might have felt afraid for your life, or you were injured physically or sexually, or were afraid you would be. You can also witness a trauma or hear about it happening to someone you care about. First responders, medical people, and clergy can also experience trauma by hearing others talk about it. For me, it was combat. I saw some really horrible things.
Schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia was first identified more than a century ago, but we still don't know its exact causes. It remains one of the most misunderstood and stigmatized illnesses today. So let's walk through what we do know, from symptoms to causes and treatments. Schizophrenia is considered a syndrome, which means it may encompass a number of related disorders that have similar symptoms but varying causes. Every person with schizophrenia has slightly different symptoms, and the first signs can be easy to miss. Subtle personality changes, irritability, or a gradual encroachment of unusual thoughts. Patients are usually diagnosed after the onset of psychosis, which typically occurs in the late teens or early 20s for men and the late 20s or early 30s for women. A first psychotic episode can feature delusions, hallucinations, and disordered speech and behavior. These are called positive symptoms, meaning they occur in people with schizophrenia but not in the general population. It's a common misperception that people with schizophrenia have multiple personalities, but these symptoms indicate a disruption of thought processes rather than the manifestation of another personality. Schizophrenia also has negative symptoms. These are qualities that are reduced in people with schizophrenia, such as motivation, expression of emotion, or speech. There are cognitive symptoms as well, like difficulty concentrating, remembering information, and making decisions. So what causes the onset of psychosis?
Activity 1. Mental health issues. Direction. The people in this activity experiencing mental health problems. Your task is to identify what triggers his or her mental health problems. 1. Jenny and her family are victims of a car accident a few months ago wherein her parents died. She always wants to be alone and cries at night before going to bed. She loves her parents so much. This is the reason why she experiences sadness and post-traumatic disorder. Write your answer under the questions. Ang mga pagpipiliang sagot ay mental illnesses, trigger. Anxiety disorder, behavioral and emotional disorders, bipolar affective disorder, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia. Activity 2. Directions. Create a campaign material showing awareness about mental health disorder. Choose any of the following activities. A. Slogan. B. Vlog. C. TikTok. D. Spoken poetry. E. Poster making. Remember, grief is a natural response to loss. It is the emotional suffering you feel when something or someone you love is taken away. Often, the pain of loss can feel overwhelming. You may experience all kinds of difficult and unexpected emotions, from shock or anger to disbelief, guilt, and profound sadness. The pain of grief can also disrupt your physical health, making it difficult to sleep, eat, or even think straight. These are normal reactions to loss, and the more significant the loss, the more intense your grief will be. Common mental disorders such as mood disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, OCD, and post-traumatic disorder is serious health problem. It needs professional care to help them handle its problems in any situation that may trigger its illness. This is your Week 8 Quarter 3. Goodbye class, keep safe. Dismiss.